So today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Lamadalad, Bava Metzia 34. We're going to start Lamad Gimel Lamad Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for a Yeshua for Am Yisrael, a Shmir for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shvuyim. Gemara has discussed yesterday that if a person was a shomer, he was a watchman, a guardian of an object, and the object was stolen or lost, and rather than take an oath that it was not his responsibility, he says, I'll pay. He says, Shilem v'loratzo l'shava. He pays, he doesn't want to take an oath. And then it turns out that the object was stolen, and the person who stole it has to pay double, that the double amount goes to the guardian, to the watchman, and not the original owner of the object, because we say that the owner of the object gave the watchman the rights to the double amount. So Maskifla Rami Bar Chama, so Rami Bar Chama said, he challenges the Mishnah. He says, I don't understand the Mishnah. How can a person give the rights to this double amount if it doesn't yet exist? A person cannot sell something that's not yet in existence. And since this double payment was not yet in existence, how could the original owner of the object sell the rights to that? Rabbi Meir, and even according to Rabbi Meir, he says, even according to Rabbi Meir, he says a person can sell something that's not yet in existence. That is Hani Milas Gomperos Dekel. When Rabbi Meir says you could sell something that's not yet in existence, that's the fruits of a palm tree. Davidi da Asu, because the palm tree, it flows from a palm tree, that the palm tree is going to produce dates. But here it's not necessarily the case. Top of Lamadal. First of all, Amar Dimignava, who says in the future, excuse me, who says in the future that this object will be stolen, that he's going to sell him the double amount when he hands it over. And that's the moment when he hands it over, he has to be B'Shas Masira. She says that's when he needs to hand it over. So Amar Dimignava, who says it's going to be stolen? Tim Somar Dimignava, and even if it's stolen, Amar Dimishdakach Ganav, who's going to say that we'll even find the thief? Dimishdakach Ganav, and even if you find the thief, Amar Dimishalim. How do you know that the thief is going to actually end up paying the double amount? Dilmi Modi Miftar. Maybe he'll admit it, and Modaviknas is pater. And if he'll admit it, he'll be exempt from paying it. So there's a lot of elements here that are not obligated. So Amarava, Rava says, Naseka Omerlo. So Rava says, it's as though we say to him, it's as though the person who gives the object to the watchman, when he hands it over to him, it's as though he says to him at the moment he hands it over, he says, if it will be stolen and then you will want to pay me instead of taking an oath, then my cow is given over to you at this moment. Rashi says at the moment that he hands it over, he says this. It's as though he says it. Because the rabbis say, the Kimlu Rabbanan, and this is the basic presumption, the rabbis assume that the owner would rather have the principal in exchange for the possible collection of the double amount by the shomer. And so therefore, it's as though he hands it over at that moment. And so therefore, retroactively, when it was stolen, the thief stole it from the watchman. And the cow was already in existence. That's how Rashi explains it. So Maska for Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Zera challenges this explanation. So Rabbi Zera challenges this explanation. He says, first of all, if we're saying that retroactively he acquired the cow from the moment he handed over, then if that's the case, he should the watchman should also be entitled to all the shearings and the offspring that the cow produced. Alamatanya, why do we learn in the Brisa? Chutz mikizosel v'odosel. Now, why do we learn in the Brisa that he gets the double payment, but not the shearings and the offsprings? Elam Rabbi Zera Nasa. So therefore, Rabbi Zera's answer is, it says, though he says to him, chutz mikizosel v'odosel. It says, I'm giving over you the cow with the exception of the shearings and the offspring. Umay psaka. So the Gemara says, how do you know that every person, when he gives over the cow, he says, I'm giving you the rights to the double, but I'm not giving you the rights to the fetuses and the shearing? The Gemara says it's the basic assumption is stama de milsa shivcha de asame alma avid inish de machne shivcha de migufa will avid inish de machne. So he says, because there's a basic assumption we could say that if there is profit that's going to come externally, a person will sell away those rights. But a profit that comes from the animal itself, a person's not going to give over those rights. Ikadami alternative version is that Rava says Nasika Omerlo. That Rava says that it's as though the owner says to the watchman, he says that if it will be stolen and you want to pay me, then right 1 second before it's stolen, I gave it over to you. That's a different approach. That's a different answer. So what does Rava's answer accomplish? What does this Ikadami accomplish? Ikabanayo Kushi to Rabbi Zera. So this takes away the question of Rabbi Zera, because here we don't have to worry about the fetus and the offspring, because he gave those over right 1 second before it was stolen. So clearly he doesn't have those rights, because the watchman didn't have those rights all the time because it wasn't given over to him. Or inami dikaimi biagam, or alternatively, in a case where the animal was in a swamp, and so therefore he wouldn't have been able to hand it over to him. He didn't have possession of it 1 second before it was stolen, so then it wouldn't work in that case, and that's the problem with the Ikadamri approach. Okay, so now we said in our Mishnah that if the watchman Shilim will Ratzali Shava, if he says he'll pay and he doesn't want to take an oath, one of the biblical oaths, and under those circumstances, we're going to say that he's entitled to the double payment. So the Gemara says, Amar B'chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Shilim Shulam Mamish. It doesn't mean he actually paid. Elakivan Sha'amar Areini Mishalim. Once he says, I want to pay, once the watchman says, I want to pay, then Alpha Pisha Lo Shilim. Even though he didn't end up paying, it's as though he paid. And he's entitled. Once he says, I want to pay. So the Gemara says, Tanan, but we have but then we learn our Mishnah, Shilin will Ratzali Shave. If he paid and he didn't want to take an oath, which implies Shilin in lo, Shilin lo, that he has to have paid in order to get the double amount. The Gemara says, no, but Ema Sefer, but the next clause says, Nishba v'lo Ratzali Shavim, that if he takes an oath and he doesn't want to pay, then he's not entitled to the double amount. That's what it said in our Mishnah. No. Nishba v'lo Ratzali Shavim. Then we're going to say that that under those circumstances the watchman doesn't get it. So there, time of the Ratza, that implies that only if he didn't want to pay Haratza, but if he wanted to pay even though he didn't pay, he gets a double amount. So from our Mishnah, you can't infer what the answer is. You can do it either way. So then the Gemara says, Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan. That if somebody rents a cow from his friend. So again, we're supporting the idea of Rabbi Yochanan that you don't have to have actually paid, you just have wanted to pay in order to be entitled to the double payment. If you're the watchman, that if somebody rents a cow, benignava, and then the cow is stolen, and then the watchman says, I'll pay, I don't want to take an oath. And then afterwards you find the thief, you pay double payment to the renter. And we see from here, all he did was say it, but he didn't actually pay it, and he's still entitled to a double amount. So now we learn another halacha. Amar Papa, Shomer Chinam, if the person is a watchman for free, then Kivan Shamar Pashati, that once he says, I was negligent, and that's where Shomer Chinam is responsible to pay. if it was shomer chinam, if it is negligent, he has to pay. So once he says I was negligent, makni like fela, he's entitled to the double amount. The buy pater navshe b'gneva, because if he wanted to, he could have actually exempted himself by saying it was stolen. Look at Rashi, makni like fela, nikne look kefal. And now Rashi says, Kol chiyuvi u'pturei dedalet shomer. Rashi reminds us here, all the obligation and exemptions of the shomer. We're going to learn out in Parakah Shaul in 94. But Rashi reminds us here of the halacha, so we'll remind ourselves. The shomer chinam, if it's a person who's a watchman for free, he has to yeshava kol. He has the ability to take an oath for everything, unless he was negligent. And we'll pasha that he wasn't negligent, because he's only responsible if he's negligent. A borrower, a shoel mishalim is a call. The borrower pays for everything. We'll see it's not exactly true, because he doesn't pay two exemptions for a borrower if it dies during the work, or if the owner was with him. Those say schar v'asocher, meaning to say the one who's paid and the renter. Peturim min ha'anusin, they're exempt for accidents. V'chayavim b'gneva v'aveda, they're responsible for theft and loss. And Shoal Rashi says the borrower is exempt b'meisa machmas malocha ru'yila, if it dies during the activity that it was basically borrowed for. He says, this is exactly why I borrowed this in the first place. And so therefore, Rashi reminds us of the Shomer. So now back to Rav Papa's statement. Now, once the Shomer Chinam says, I was negligent, then he gets the rights of the double, because he could have exempted himself by claiming it was stolen. Shomer Sachar, Kivan Shomer Nignava, once the Shomer Sachar says it was stolen, Makni like Feel, he gets the right to the double amount. The buy Pater Navshe Bishvur, because he wants to, he could have claimed it was broken, it was an accident to Mesa, or it died. Shoal, a borrower, Shomer Hareini Mishalim. Borrower says, I want to pay one makni like Fela. He doesn't get the double amount, because how could the borrower have exempted himself? If the animal died during the normal course of activity, that's not a common occurrence. And so therefore, since it's not a common occurrence, therefore we don't say that he could have claimed that. Alternatively, Amar Papa says, Shoal Nami, a borrower also, and once he says, I'll pay, we also give him the double amount. Because he could have claimed he had died in the normal course of activity. So Rav Zvid says, this is what Abaye taught. A shoel, that Rav Zvid says that the borrower, that the borrower, until he pays, he's not going to acquire the double amount until he actually pays. My timer, what's the reasoning? Because since the borrower is getting all the benefit, just by claiming something or saying he was going to pay, he doesn't acquire the double amount. And Tanya Kavasi de Rav Zvid, so we have a brisa that supports a statement of Rav Zvid, because if one borrows a cow from his friend, and then it was stolen, v'kidem hashoel v'shilem, and the borrower pays, and then we discover the thief, mishalim tashume kofel v'shol. Then he pays the double amount to the borrower. So lishna kama Rav Papa vada lo avitiyufta. According to the first approach of Rav Papa, that he said that the borrower says, I will pay, he has not acquired the double amount, for sure this is not a problem. Because in this price, we say that the borrower does not acquire the double amount unless he pays. But according to the second explanation, that also when the shoal says, I will pay, he acquires the rights to double. Is it a contradiction? So Papa, no, this price is not any stronger than our Mishnah, the Katani Shilem, where it says the Lashon expression of paid, and we said it really means he said he would pay. So to here also, Hachinami Ba'amar. Here too, he just said he would pay. Gemara says, "Mi dummy." The two cases are not the same. Hasamol katani kidem. There it didn't say kidem v'shilem, that he jumped at and paid. Hacha katani kidem, that he jumped at. My kidem v'amar. So it means that he paid. So the Gemara says, "No, my kidem. What does it mean kidem? It means kidem v'amar. He jumped at and said." Gemara says it can't be. I'm the katani gabe socher v'amar v'gabe shol kidem. No, for the fact that socher By the renter, it says he said, and by the borrower, it says he kidem. Shmamina dafka katani. It doesn't mean it means he specifically jumped in and paid, not that he said. Gemara says, Mide gabe adadi tanya. We don't know if these two brises are sitting next to each other. So Shalino with Tanai, debate Rabbi Chia with debate Rabbi Oshaya. So they asked the Tanaim who are studying in the Academy of Rabbi Chia and Academy of Rabbi Oshaya, Amri gabe adadi tanya. And the two brises were said together and they were studied together. So therefore, we can learn out from the fact that one says Kidem and one says Amar, that Kidem means Dafka, that means he specifically paid. So the Gemara says, Pshita, it's obvious that he says, Eini Mishalim. If the person says, I'm not going to pay. V'chazar Amar Hareini Mishalim. If he says, I'm not going to pay, and then he comes back and says, you know what, I will pay. Haka Amar Hareini Mishalim. So therefore, since he says, I'm going to pay, he's entitled to the double amount. But let's say, Ella Amar Hareini Mishalim. Let's say he says, I'm going to pay. V'chazar v'amar Eini Mishalim. And then he says, you know what, I'm not going to pay. My. The Gemara is going to have here a series of questions, and there's going to be 11 different basically scenarios, and the Gemara is going to leave all of them unresolved. So in this case, what will be the law? That he's recanting his declaration to pay, and therefore he's no longer entitled to the double amount. Or no, maybe he's just speaking words. He's just trying to push off actually paying until later. So we don't answer that question. Amar Arini Mishalim, let's say he says, I'm going to pay, umeis, and then he dies. So Amar Banav, and then the children say, no, we're not going to pay. Do we say in this case that is he entitled to the double amount? Do we say he changed his mind? Or do we say no, that they were responsible for what their father said, and they were just pushing him off, but yet they're still entitled to double amount? Third case, let's say the children paid. Do we say Matzi Amarlo that he could say to them, when I gave the rights to the double amount, that was to your father, David Niach Namshi, because your father was good to me. But was he Daikulo, but to you, no. Odilma Loshna, Shilma Odilma Loshna. Or maybe it doesn't matter. Number 4, Shilim Lavanim Mai. Let's say what happened was the Shomer pays the children of the owner. Do we say Matzi Amaleki what could they say when our father gave you a double amount because you were good to him? But for us, not. Maybe it doesn't matter. Number 5, Shomul Banim Labanim. Let's say the children pay the children. Do we say my? What will be the law there? Or number 6, Shulim Mechza my. Let's say he pays half. Or Shal Shtei Paros V'Shulim Achasman. Or let's say he borrowed 2 cows and he paid for one of them. Or Shalmana Shutfin, or let's say borrowed from partners, Vishilim Achaman, and he paid one of them. Or do we say Shutfin Shashalo Vishilim Achaman? Or let's say we have partners that borrowed and one of them paid. Shalmana Isha, let's say he borrows from the woman, Vishilim Labal, and he pays her husband. What will be the law there? Or Isha Shashalo Vishilim Bal, or let's say a woman borrowed and then she paid her, and then her husband paid. In all these cases, what will be the halacha? So what would be the law there? So Rashi says, going back a little bit, Rashi says, "Likno it's kefil." Me amrina. Do we say kiven the karen labdabahu? In the case of a woman, since the husband doesn't own the principal, therefore labda shlumin ma'ayaninu. Well, kanik fela. Therefore, it's not a real payment, and so therefore he has not acquired the double amount. Or do we say that since he's the executor, it's like it's a payment? And then let's say a woman borrowed the money for Rashi says for the purposes of her nichsei, of her property, and then her husband pays the money to the borrower. What would be the law there? To the lender. Okay. So in all these cases, the Gemara concludes Teiko. The Gemara doesn't really conclude. So now we go to the next case. Amar Avuna. So Rav Huna says, even though this person says, I refuse to take an oath, the guardian says, I'm not going to take an oath, I'm going to pay, we still make him take an oath. We make him take an oath that it's not in his domain. Why? Hashina Shema Einav Nasamba. We have to be concerned. Maybe he put his eyes on it and he says, you know what? I'll just say I don't have it. I'll pay for it, and then I'll get to keep the object. So we don't want him to do that. So that's Rav Huna's principle. So the Gemara challenges somebody lends his friend money on a mashkon. So basically, this is going to come from a Mishnah in Shavuos, and the Mishnah in Shavuos is going to have 4 cases. So, case number 1, Reuven lends money to Shimon. Let's say he lends him money, and Shimon gives him a collateral in exchange for that loan. Collateral in this case is like the deposit. V'avad hamashkon. Now Reuven loses the collateral. V'amarlo. Reuven says, "Sela helvisicha alav." I lent you. So now in this case, the lender says to the borrower, "I lent you a sela, which is worth 2 shekel. The shekel hayashava, and you gave me a collateral which was worth half of that." And the borrower says, "Va'ala amar lo ki ala sela v'sani alav sela." So he says, hold on one second. Okay, so he says, hold on. Okay, so just back to this. Sorry, somebody was asking me a question. Okay, so he says, the lender says, I lent you a sela, and it was worth a shekel, meaning it was worth half a sela. And the borrower says, no, you lent me a sela, and the collateral was worth a sela, meaning he denies everything. So Potter, since he denies everything, he's exempt. Second case, sela I lent you a sela, shekel hayashaveh, and the lender says it was worth half a sela. V'hala Amar, and the borrower says, no, sell v'tani lav shlosha dinar in hayashava, meaning he's partial admission. He says, I gave you 3/4 of a sell as a collateral. Then we're going to say, under those circumstances, chayiv, then he has to take an oath. Third case, sell v'tani lav, I lent you a sella, beis hayashava, it was worth 2 shkalim, meaning to say, the lender says, whatever I lent you, you gave me beis hayashava. He says, I lent you in this case, what's going on in this case, the borrower is making the claim to the lender. The borrower says, the borrower says to the lender that I borrowed 1 sela, but the collateral was worth 2, meaning to say, you owe me a sela. And the borrower the borrower says to the lender, and the lender says back to the borrower, no, it was, I lent you a sela, and the mashkon was worth a sela. He denies everything. So Potter, in that case, is going to be exempt because the lender has said he's denying everything. The fourth case, the borrower says, sela v'sani alav, you lent me a sela, but shnayim hayashava, but my collateral was worth 2. And the lender says back, says, no, you gave me something that was worth not a sela, but chamisha dinar, meaning to say, it was worth more than a sela, but it was only worth 5 dinarim, not 2 sela. So he's partially denying it. In that case, he has to take an oath. Chayev. So minishba in all these cases, who is the one who takes the oath? Misha pikadon etzlo, the one who is supposed to be watching the pikadon, the deposit, i.e., in this case, the lender. Shema yishavazeh, because we're concerned that maybe the borrower will take an oath. V'yotzi ha'asa pikadon, and then the lender will produce the deposit and will prove that the borrower was incorrect, and the borrower's claim was false, and so therefore he's going to be disqualified to take an oath. And why do we care that he's disqualified to take an oath? So Rashi says, because we don't want him to become apostle for Adus. So the Gemara says, ahai, which case is this referring to? Which of these cases in the Mishnah, when we say that the lender should swear, not the borrower, which cases are referring to? Now, it can't be referring to case number 1 and 3 because nobody takes an oath in those cases. So if you want to say it's referring to case number 4, ilema asefa. If you want to say that it's referring to the last case where we say that the lender was partially denying it, well, if that's the case, of course he doesn't take an oath there. Of course the lender has to take the oath here. He's the one who's denying partially, because he's doing a partial admission. Shmuel Aresha. So it's referring to the second case, Aresha and my Aresha, Asefa Deresha. Basically, the second case where the lender says, I lent you 1 shekel, 1 selah, and you gave me back a deposit that was worth a shekel. And he says, no, I gave you back a deposit that was worth 3/4 of a selah, meaning say it's a partial admission. So selah v'sicholav shekel yeshav. V'olam lokel selah v'sanim ham 3 dinar yeshav chayav d'shvua gabe lovehu. V'amar Rabbanan l'shtabe malva. And in that case, the rabbi is saying that the lender should take the oath. Shema yishavazeh. Maybe the borrower would take the oath. V'yotza halas apikadon. And then the lender would produce the deposit. V'misa with Rav Huna. But if you want to say the case of Rav Huna, we're on top of Lamed Hayam and Aleph, that the watchman always has to pay, that it's not his domain. Kimin the mishtaba malva sheina bershusa echlimatzi malbikle. Once the lender has said it's not in his domain anymore, how could he then produce it? How can the Mishnah say that? We have to be concerned that if the borrower will take an oath, the lender will then take out the deposit and disqualify it. He already took the oath and it's not his domain. So Rava says, no, yesh edem shenisrafa. Rava says we're talking about a case that he doesn't have to take this oath because there are already witnesses who say it was burnt. So therefore the Gemara says, if that's the case, if there are witnesses who say it was burnt, where is he going to bring it? So that we're concerned that if the borrower will take the oath, he's going to take it out. No, there are witnesses that stole. So the Gemara says it's still there. He brought it. So the Gemara is going to go on, or the Gemara says, well, if the lender takes the oath, well, still the borrower could bring it. So the Gemara says, okay, it makes sense if the lender knows who went into his house and he can get it. How does the borrower is not going to be able to get it back to bring it? Okay, that's today's daf. Abai is going to give a different answer, and the Rav Ashi will give a different answer, but we'll have to stop here, and we'll pick this up at 8, and again tonight and tomorrow we'll